The snow fell like ash from a broken sky, each flake carrying the weight of secrets buried too deep for too long. Some crashes happen in an instant, metal against metal, life against fate. Others take decades to unfold, one lie building upon another until the foundation cracks and everything comes tumbling down. In the small town of Millbrook, where everybody knows your name and half your business, a storm was brewing that would shatter more than just the winter silence. It would unearth family secrets that some had killed to keep buried. It would force a man to choose between the ghost of his past and the flesh and blood future standing before him. Because sometimes when you rescue a stranger from the wreckage, you discover she's not a stranger at all. Sometimes she's the answer to questions you never knew you should have been asking. And sometimes, saving someone else means confronting the lies that have been slowly destroying your own soul. This is the story of what happens when the dead refuse to stay buried and when love becomes the most dangerous force of all. The snow fell in thick, relentless sheets across Highway 34, turning the familiar stretch of road between Millbrook and Cedar Falls into an unrecognizable white maze. David Matthews gripped the steering wheel of his pickup truck, his knuckles white against the worn leather as he squinted through the windshield. The wipers struggled against the accumulating snow, their rhythmic scraping the only sound breaking the winter silence. "Daddy, I can't see anything," 8-year-old Katie whispered from the back seat, her voice small and worried as she pressed her nose against the fogged window. "It's okay, sweetheart," David replied, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his shoulders. "We're almost home. Just a few more miles." The radio crackled with weather warnings, travel not recommended. Emergency vehicles only, but David had no choice. Katie's school had called an early dismissal, and Mrs. Henderson from next door was getting too old to drive in weather like this. 5 years of single parenting had taught him that sometimes you just had to push through, storm or no storm. As they rounded the bend near Miller's Creek Bridge, David's headlights caught something that made his heart stop. A silver sedan sat crumpled against the guardrail, its front end buried in a snowbank, steam hissing from beneath the twisted hood. One headlight flickered weakly, like a dying star in the white void. "Stay in the truck. Katie," David commanded, already throwing the vehicle into park. "Lock the doors and don't get out for anyone but me." The cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped into the storm. Snow immediately filled his boots and stung his face as he half ran, half slid toward the wreckage. The driver's side door hung open at an awkward angle, and slumped behind the wheel was a woman, her dark hair matted with blood, her face pale as the snow falling around them. David's breath caught in his throat. Even unconscious, even injured, the resemblance was unmistakable. The same delicate bone structure, the same full lips, the same dark lashes that had once fluttered against his cheek in the early morning light. For a moment that stretched into eternity, his rational mind abandoned him entirely. "Sarah." The name escaped his lips as barely more than a whisper, lost in the howling wind. But that was impossible. Sarah had been gone for 5 years, buried in the cemetery behind St. Mary's under a headstone that read, "Beloved wife and mother." He'd stood there every week since, watching seasons change around her grave, learning to live with the Sarah-shaped hole in his world. The woman stirred, her eyelids fluttering. Dark green eyes, Sarah's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and confused. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" David forced his voice into the calm, professional tone he'd learned during his volunteer EMT training. "You've been in an accident." She blinked slowly, trying to focus on his face. Where am I?" "About 10 miles outside Millbrook, Ohio. What's your name?" A long pause, her brow furrowed as if the question caused physical pain. I don't, I can't remember." David checked her pulse, steady but rapid. A gash across her forehead had stopped bleeding, but he could see the beginning of a serious bruise along her jawline. No obvious broken bones, but the way she winced when she tried to move suggested possible internal injuries. "We need to get you to a hospital," he said, already supporting her weight as she struggled to sit up. "Can you walk?" She nodded, though her legs shook as he helped her from the wreckage. As they made their way to his truck, David couldn't stop stealing glances at her profile. The resemblance to Sarah was so striking, it made his chest ache. But there were differences too. This woman was thinner, her features sharper, aged by experiences Sarah never had the chance to face. Katie's eyes went wide as David helped the stranger into the passenger seat. "Daddy, she looks like—" "I know, baby." David cut her off gently. "She's hurt. We're going to help her." As they drove toward Millbrook General, the woman drifted in and out of consciousness. During her lucid moments, she answered David's questions with growing frustration. No, she couldn't remember her name. No, she didn't know where she'd been going. The last thing she remembered was driving through heavy snow. Then nothing. "The doctors will figure it out," David assured her, though his own mind was reeling. "Memory loss after head trauma is common. It usually comes back." At the hospital, David found himself reluctant to leave. He told himself it was concern for a fellow human being, civic duty, the right thing to do. But as he watched the medical team wheel her away, he knew it was something more, something he wasn't ready to name. Dr. Patricia Chen, the attending physician, was an old friend of Sarah's. She emerged from the examination room 3 hours later with a puzzled expression. "Mild concussion, some bruised ribs. That gash needed 12 stitches, she reported. "But David, I have to ask, who is she? She's not in any of our systems. No ID in the car. And that amnesia, it's real. Head trauma can cause temporary memory loss. But this is pretty comprehensive." David shook his head. "I found her on Highway 34. She doesn't remember anything." Dr. Chen lowered her voice. "David, I knew Sarah for 15 years. This woman, the resemblance is extraordinary. Are you sure Sarah didn't have any family she never mentioned?" "Sarah grew up in foster care," David replied automatically. "No family." But even as he said the words, a nagging doubt tugged at his memory. Sarah had been intensely private about her childhood, changing the subject whenever he asked too many questions. He'd assumed it was too painful to discuss, and he'd respected her boundaries. Now he wondered what else she might have kept hidden. The woman Jane Doe, according to her chart, was awake when David returned to her room the next morning. She sat propped against pillows, looking out the window at the snow-covered parking lot with an expression of profound loneliness. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. She turned toward him, and again he was struck by those familiar green eyes. "Better. The headache's almost gone. Dr. Chen says I can leave today if someone can, if I have somewhere to go." The unspoken truth hung between them. She had nowhere to go because she couldn't remember where home was. "Millbrook has a decent motel," David offered. "The Sleepy Inn. It's clean, safe." "I don't know if I have money," she said quietly. "I don't even know my own name." David found himself making a decision that would have seemed insane just 24 hours earlier. "There's a guest room at my house, just until you get your memory back and figure out your next steps." She stared at him in surprise. "You don't even know me." "I know you're in trouble and need help," he replied. "That's enough for now." What he didn't say was that looking at her felt like having Sarah in the room again, and he wasn't ready to let that feeling go. Not yet. The Matthews house sat on Maple Street like a postcard from a simpler time, white clapboard siding, green shutters, a wraparound porch where David had planned to grow old with Sarah. Inside, the walls held 5 years' worth of careful preservation. Sarah's books still on the shelves, her coffee mug still in the cabinet, her favorite throw pillow exactly where she'd left it on the couch. David showed Jane Doe to the guest room, acutely aware of how strange this was. The room had been Sarah's craft space, where she'd sewn Katie's Halloween costumes and wrapped Christmas presents in secret. Now it held a stranger who looked so much like his dead wife that Katie kept staring and asking questions he couldn't answer. "There are clean towels in the bathroom," David said, setting down the small bag of toiletries Dr. Chen had provided. "Katie and I usually eat dinner around 6. You're welcome to join us." Or if you need space, I'd like that, she said quickly. To join you. I mean, if it's not too much trouble. That evening, as the three of them sat around the kitchen table sharing David's admittedly mediocre spaghetti and meatballs, something shifted in the house's atmosphere. Jane Doe seemed to instinctively know where things were reaching for the Parmesan cheese in the exact cabinet where Sarah had always kept it, automatically grabbing the napkins from their spot beside the stove. Katie noticed too. How did you know where the salt was? She asked with 8-year-old directness. Jane Doe froze, her hand still extended toward the shaker. I don't know. Lucky guess. But David saw the confusion in her eyes, the way she looked around the kitchen as if recognizing it from a half-remembered dream. After Katie went to bed, David found himself sitting across from this mysterious woman at the same table where he and Sarah had planned their future, discussed their fears, shared their hopes. The silence stretched between them, comfortable and terrifying in equal measure. Thank you, she said finally, for all of this. I know it must be strange, taking in a complete stranger. You're not exactly a stranger, David admitted. You remind me of someone I used to know. Your wife. The question was gentle, without prying. David nodded. Sarah. She passed away 5 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry. The sympathy in her voice was genuine, tinged with a sadness that seemed deeper than appropriate for a stranger's loss. The resemblance is remarkable, David continued. So much so that Katie asked if you were her mommy come back. Something flickered across Jane Doe's face. Pain. Recognition. Something David couldn't quite identify. She stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. I should probably turn in, she said. It's been a long day. But David had seen that expression before, in Sarah's face during those rare moments when her past threatened to surface. It was the look of someone carrying secrets too heavy to bear. The next morning brought the first wave of gossip. Millbrook was the kind of town where news traveled faster than the morning coffee, and by 8 a.m., half the population had heard about David Matthews taking in the mysterious accident victim who looked exactly like his dead wife. David was changing the oil in Mrs. Patterson's Buick when Tom Bradley, who owned the hardware store next door, wandered over with poorly disguised curiosity. Heard you had some excitement the other night, Tom said, leaning against the garage door frame. Found someone in the storm. Car accident on Highway 34. David replied without looking up. Woman was hurt, needed help. That's what I heard. Also heard she's the spitting image of Sarah. David's hand tightened on the wrench. People see what they want to see? Maybe so, but Kathy Morrison was at the hospital yesterday, and she said it was like seeing a ghost. Got her so rattled she nearly forgot why she was there. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a black Lincoln Town car, out of place among Millbrook's pickup trucks and aging sedans. A man in an expensive suit climbed out, his face grim with determination. David's blood chilled. Robert Sterling, Sarah's older brother, the successful Chicago lawyer who'd barely spoken to David since Sarah's funeral. Robert had never approved of his sister marrying a small-town mechanic, and he'd made his feelings clear at every family gathering. Robert, David said, wiping his hands on a shop rag. This is unexpected. David, Robert's greeting was cold, professional. I hear you've been harboring some interesting guests lately. If you mean the woman I helped after a car accident, then yes, she's recovering from her injuries. Robert's laugh held no humor. Recovering? That's what we're calling it, David. I've seen the photos. Social media is a wonderful thing. That woman is either Sarah's twin sister, which is impossible, or she's running some kind of elaborate con game. Con game, David felt his temper rising. She has amnesia from head trauma. She doesn't even remember her own name. How convenient. Robert stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Sarah is dead. David, I buried my sister 5 years ago. Whatever game this woman is playing, it ends now. I won't have Sarah's memory dishonored by some grifter looking to cash in on a grieving man's weakness." Before David could respond, Robert turned and walked back to his car. But his parting words carried clearly across the garage. "Get rid of her, David, before you regret it." That evening, David found Jane Doe sitting on the front porch swing, wrapped in one of Sarah's old sweaters that Katie had insisted she borrow. The resemblance in the fading light was so strong, it took his breath away. "I've been thinking," she said without looking at him. "Maybe I should leave. Go to Chicago or Cleveland. Somewhere with better resources for finding out who I am." David sat beside her, the swing creaking gently under their combined weight. "Is that what you want to do?" "I don't know what I want," she admitted. "I don't even know who I am. But I can see how my being here is affecting people. The stares, the whispers. It's not fair to you or Katie." "Let me worry about what's fair to my family," David said quietly. "The question is, do you feel safe here?" She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes. For the first time since I woke up in that hospital, I feel safe." "Then you stay as long as you need to." But even as he made the promise, David couldn't shake Robert's words. What if this was all some elaborate deception? What if his grief was making him vulnerable to manipulation? That night, unable to sleep, David found himself in Sarah's old closet, surrounded by clothes that still held traces of her perfume. He pulled down a box of photographs from the top shelf, their wedding album, vacation snapshots, candid moments from their life together. And there, tucked between pictures of their honeymoon in the Smoky Mountains, was a photograph he'd forgotten about. Sarah at 19, laughing at something off camera, her arm around another young woman with the same dark hair, the same green eyes, the same delicate features. David's hands shook as he studied the photo. On the back, in Sarah's careful handwriting, "Sarah and Emma, sisters of the heart, foster care graduation day." Emma. The woman sleeping in his guest room could be Emma, but Sarah had never mentioned an Emma. In 5 years of marriage, through countless conversations about their hopes for Katie's future, their fears about being good parents, their dreams of growing old together, Sarah had never once mentioned having a sister. David sat on the closet floor until dawn, staring at that photograph and wondering what other secrets his wife had taken to her grave. The scream shattered the pre-dawn quiet like glass hitting concrete. David bolted upright in bed, instantly alert, already moving toward the source of the sound before his mind fully processed what he'd heard. The guest room. Jane Doe. He found her sitting up in bed, her face pale and damp with sweat, her hands trembling as she pressed them against her temples. The bed sheets were twisted around her legs as if she'd been fighting invisible demons. "Hey, hey, it's okay," David said softly, keeping his distance but making his presence known. "You're safe. You're in Millbrook, at my house. You had a nightmare." Her green eyes found his in the dim light filtering through the curtains. For a moment, she looked completely lost, like a child waking up in a strange place. Then recognition dawned, and she took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to wake you." "Don't apologize. Bad dreams are part of recovery from head trauma. Do you remember what you were dreaming about?" She was quiet for so long that David thought she might not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "A little girl, dark hair, green eyes. She was crying, reaching for me. But every time I tried to get to her, she got further away, and there was a woman's voice, angry, saying I couldn't have her, that I wasn't family." David's heart clenched. "Just a dream," he said gently. Sometimes the mind processes trauma in strange ways. But even as he spoke the words, he was thinking about the photograph hidden in his bedside drawer, about Sarah's careful handwriting, Sarah and Emma, sisters of the heart. The next morning brought the first real breakthrough. Jane Doe was helping Katie with her breakfast when she suddenly stopped mid-motion, the orange juice pitcher frozen halfway to Katie's glass. "Emma," she said suddenly, her voice sharp with surprise. My name is Emma. Katie looked up from her cereal. Emma, that's a pretty name. Emma what? David asked carefully, but she was already shaking her head, frustration creeping into her expression. I don't know, just Emma. But I know that's my name. I know it like I know. Like I know that coffee should have cream in it, not sugar. Like I know that roses make me sneeze, but tulips don't. It was a start. Over the following days, more fragments emerged. Emma remembered that she worked in an office building, somewhere with tall windows and the sound of traffic far below. She remembered the taste of deep dish pizza and the smell of Lake Michigan in winter. Chicago, David realized. She'd been living in Chicago. We should call the police there, Emma said during one of their evening conversations. If I was reported missing, there might be someone looking for me. David agreed, but the call to Chicago PD yielded nothing. No missing person reports matching Emma's description, no abandoned apartment or worried employer calling in welfare checks. It was as if she'd existed in complete isolation, with no one close enough to notice her absence. That's impossible, Emma said when David relayed the information. Everyone has someone, family, friends, co-workers. But David could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. What kind of life left no traces when it suddenly disappeared? The answer came 3 days later, delivered by a FedEx truck that left David staring at a package addressed to Emma Hayes, C.O. David Matthews. Inside was a box of personal belongings forwarded by her former landlord, along with a note explaining that her lease had expired and her belongings were being cleared out. Emma's hands shook as she opened the box. Inside were the fragments of a solitary life, a few books, some jewelry, a laptop computer, and at the bottom, a manila envelope thick with documents. Birth certificate, Emma read aloud, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. Emma Catherine Hayes, born December 15th, 1981. Father Michael Hayes, mother Rebecca Sterling. Hayes. David felt the world tilt sideways. Sterling, he repeated. Rebecca Sterling Hayes. Emma looked up sharply. Why does that name mean something to you? Before David could answer, footsteps pounded up the front porch steps. The door burst open without a knock, and Robert Sterling stood in the doorway, his face flushed with anger and something that might have been fear. Where is she? He demanded. Where's the woman pretending to be? He stopped mid-sentence as his eyes fell on Emma sitting at the kitchen table. Documents spread before her. The color drained from his face as if he'd seen a ghost. Hello, Bobby, Emma said softly. And suddenly her voice carried a weight of memory, of recognition, of years of buried pain. It's been a long time. The silence in the kitchen stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Robert Sterling stood frozen in the doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled from the drive, his usually perfect composure cracking like ice in spring. Emma remained seated at the table, but David could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped the edge of her birth certificate. This isn't possible, Robert whispered, shaking his head. You're dead. Mother said you were dead. Mother said a lot of things, Emma replied, her voice steady but cold. Most of them lies. David looked between them, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with nauseating clarity. You're related, he said. It wasn't a question. She's my sister, Robert said, slumping against the doorframe as if his legs could no longer support him. My half-sister, same mother, different fathers. He looked at Emma with something between regret and terror. Emma, what are you doing here? How did you find Sarah? I didn't find Sarah, Emma said quietly. Sarah's been dead for 5 years. Bobby, I know because I read her obituary online. I've been reading it every year on the anniversary, wondering if I should have tried harder to find her while she was alive. David felt the room spinning around him. Wait, you knew Sarah was dead. Then why? Because I didn't know she was married to you, Emma interrupted, finally looking at him. I didn't know about Katie. I was driving through Ohio, trying to decide if I should visit her grave. When the storm hit, she gestured to her healing forehead. The head injury just made it easier to avoid explaining why a stranger was carrying Sarah Matthews' maiden name in her documents. "You've had your memory back for days," David realized. Emma nodded. "Since the second morning, but I didn't know how to explain who I was without explaining why Sarah never told you about me." Robert moved into the kitchen like a man walking to his execution. "She never told him because I made her promise not to." "What?" David's voice was dangerously quiet. "When Sarah aged out of foster care, she tracked Emma down." Robert continued, his words coming faster now, as if confession might offer some kind of absolution. "Emma was 17, still in the system, bouncing between group homes. Sarah wanted to take her in, give her a stable home. But you stopped her," Emma said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact that somehow made it worse. Robert nodded miserably. "I was 25, just starting my law practice. Sarah was 19, working 2 jobs to support herself. I convinced her that taking in a troubled teenager would ruin both their lives. I told her Emma was better off where she was, that the system would take care of her. The system aged me out 2 years later with nothing," Emma said quietly. "No family, no support, no one who cared if I lived or died." David felt a rage building in his chest, unlike anything he'd experienced since Sarah's diagnosis. "And Sarah just went along with this. Sarah was young and scared, and trusted me to know what was best," Robert said defensively. "She made me promise to keep track of Emma, to make sure she was okay. I was supposed to check on her, send reports. But you didn't," Emma finished. "After that first year, the reports stopped coming. Sarah thought I'd moved on, built a new life, didn't need her anymore." Robert's composure finally cracked completely. "I was building my practice. I was busy. I told myself you were better off making your own way. You told yourself that because it was easier than admitting you'd separated 2 sisters who'd already lost everything," David said, his voice barely controlled. The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking of Sarah's favorite clock on the wall. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice soft but clear. "I've spent 20 years wondering why my sister abandoned me," she said. 20 years thinking I wasn't worth fighting for. 20 years building a life where I didn't get too close to anyone, because I knew they'd leave eventually." She stood up slowly, gathering the scattered documents from the table. "Sarah tried to find me before she died, didn't she? Bobby." Robert nodded, tears streaming down his face. "The last 2 years, when she knew the cancer was winning, she hired private investigators, spent thousands of dollars. She was desperate to find you, to explain. But she never did. The investigator found you 6 months after she died. I didn't know how to tell you. What was the point Sarah was gone?" Emma looked at him with something that might have been pity. "The point, Bobby, was that I deserved to know my sister had loved me. I deserved to grieve her. I deserved to know I had a niece." She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back to David. "I'll pack my things. I've caused enough disruption to your life." "You're not going anywhere," David said firmly. "Not yet." Emma shook her head. "David, you married my sister without knowing I existed. Katie's getting attached to someone who's essentially a stranger. This is too complicated, too messy." "Maybe," David agreed. "But walking away isn't going to fix 20 years of lies and lost time. And I think Sarah would want us to try to figure this out together." From the top of the stairs came a small voice. "And Emma, are you leaving?" They all looked up to see Katie sitting on the top step in her pajamas, her eyes wide and worried. How long she'd been listening, David couldn't tell, but clearly she'd heard enough. "Come down here, sweetheart," David said gently. Katie descended the stairs slowly, then walked straight to Emma and took her hand. "You're my mommy's sister," she said. It wasn't a question. Emma knelt down to Katie's eye level. "Yes, I am. But I never got to meet your mommy, and I'm sorry about that." Are you going to leave like Mommy did? The question hit Emma like a physical blow. David could see her struggling to find words that would be both honest and age-appropriate. I don't want to leave, Emma said finally. But sometimes grown-ups make things complicated when they should be simple. Katie looked around at the three adults, her 8-year-old wisdom cutting through years of adult mistakes with stunning clarity. Mommy always said family finds a way. Maybe you're supposed to be our family now. And in that moment, David realized his daughter was absolutely right. The letter was hidden in the back of Sarah's jewelry box, tucked behind the velvet lining where David would never have thought to look. Katie found it while helping Emma organize Sarah's belongings, a task they'd undertaken together, as a way of helping Emma understand the sister she'd never really known. "What's this?" Katie asked, holding up the sealed envelope. On the front, in Sarah's careful handwriting, "For Emma, if she ever comes home." Emma's hands shook as she took the letter. David sat beside her on the bed that had once been his and Sarah's, while Katie curled up on Emma's other side, somehow understanding that this was a moment that required witnesses. The letter was dated just 3 months before Sarah's death. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then God has answered at least one of my prayers. I've been looking for you for 2 years now, ever since the doctors told me the cancer was back and wouldn't be leaving this time. I need you to know that not a day has passed in 20 years that I haven't thought about you. I need you to know that Bobby lied to both of us, and I was too young and scared to question him. I need you to know that I loved you then, and I love you now, and I would give anything for the chance to tell you in person. I'm married to the most wonderful man named David. He doesn't know about you because I was ashamed not of you, never of you, but of my own cowardice in losing you. I was afraid that if I told him about my failures as a sister, he'd wonder what other ways I might fail as a wife and mother. We have a daughter named Katie. She's 5 years old and perfect and stubborn, just like you were. I see you in her, sometimes the way she tilts her head when she's thinking, the way she stands up for what's right even when it's hard. I named her Catherine after you, though I could never tell David why. Emma, if something happens to me before I find you, please know this David is a good man who will love you like the sister you are if you give him the chance. Katie needs to know she has an aunt who survived everything life threw at her and came out strong. And maybe, if I'm not asking too much, they both need someone who will love them the way I won't be able to. You were never abandoned. Emma, you were loved every single day by a sister who just didn't know how to find her way back to you. Please forgive me. Please stay. Please help David understand that family isn't just about the people we choose. It's about the people who choose us back. All my love, Sarah P. S. There's a trust fund in your name at First National Bank. It's not much, but it's everything I could save for you over the years. The paperwork is in the safe behind our wedding photo. David has the combination." The room was silent except for the sound of quiet crying. Emma wept for the sister she'd lost twice, once to Robert's manipulation, and again to cancer. David wept for the wife who'd carried such guilt in her final years. And Katie, wise beyond her years, simply wrapped her arms around Emma and held on tight. "She knew you'd come," Katie whispered. "Mommy always said love finds a way." That evening, David sat in his workshop behind the garage, trying to process everything he'd learned. The trust fund was real. Sarah had been putting aside $50 a month for 15 years, building a small fortune intended to help Emma build a stable life. The paperwork showed that she'd been updating Emma's contact information whenever the private investigator found new addresses, always hoping, always believing that someday they'd be reunited. Emma found him there around midnight, wrapped in one of Sarah's old cardigans, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Couldn't sleep either," she asked, settling onto the old wooden stool beside his workbench. "Keep thinking about all the conversations Sarah and I had about family," David admitted. How she always said Katie was lucky to have both sets of grandparents. How important it was for kids to know where they came from. Meanwhile, she was carrying this huge secret about having a sister. "She was protecting you," Emma said quietly. "In her mind. Anyway, she thought if you knew she'd failed me, You'd worry she'd fail Katie. That's ridiculous. Sarah never failed anyone. She failed me. The words were spoken without accusation, just sad acceptance. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but she left me in that system when she could have fought for me, and then she spent 20 years trying to make up for it. David looked at her in the dim light of the workshop. And now I'm sitting in my dead sister's husband's workshop, wearing her clothes, drinking coffee with the man she loved, trying to figure out how to be an aunt to a niece I didn't know existed. Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. It's complicated. Katie adores you. Katie adores the idea of having an aunt. She doesn't really know who I am. Do you know who you are? The question hung between them like a challenge. Emma was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee as if it might hold answers. I'm a woman who spent her entire adult life afraid to get too close to anyone because everyone I've ever loved has left, she said finally. I'm someone who builds walls instead of relationships because walls are safer. I'm someone who's been running from the possibility of family for so long that I don't know how to stop running. David set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. So stop running. It's not that simple. Why not? Because Emma's voice rose. Then she caught herself and lowered it again. Because what if I'm not good at this? What if I hurt Katie the way I was hurt? What if I fall in love with this life you've built and then something happens and I lose it all again? What if you don't? David countered. What if you stay and we figure it out together and Katie grows up knowing she has an aunt who chose to love her? What if we honor Sarah's memory by becoming the family she wanted us to be? Emma looked at him with tears in her eyes. Is that what you want? Really, because I need you to be sure? David, I can't be someone's placeholder or guilt relief. I can't be the woman you care about because I remind you of Sarah. David stood up and crossed to where she sat. He took her hands in his, feeling the calluses from her years of hard work, the strength in her fingers, the trembling that betrayed her vulnerability. You're not Sarah, he said quietly. You're not a replacement or a substitute or a way for me to hold on to something I've lost. You're Emma Strong, brave, kind, stubborn Emma, who survived 20 years of abandonment and still has enough love left to read bedtime stories to a little girl she barely knows. He paused, gathering courage for what he needed to say next. And I think I'm falling in love with you. Not because you're Sarah's sister, but because you're you. And if that complicates things, if that makes you want to run, I'll understand. But I needed you to know. Emma stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception or self-delusion. Then, slowly, she smiled the first genuinely happy smile he'd seen from her since the accident. I think I'm falling in love with you too, she admitted. And yes, it terrifies me. But maybe being terrified is better than being alone. David leaned forward and kissed her, soft and gentle and full of promise. It didn't taste like goodbye this time. It tasted like possibility. Spring came to Millbrook like a whispered promise, melting away the winter that had brought Emma crashing into their lives. The town had gradually stopped staring, though David suspected it was more due to the bigger scandal of the mayor's son being arrested for public intoxication than any real acceptance of their unusual situation. Emma had moved out of the guest room and into a small apartment above the bakery on Main Street. It was temporary, she insisted, just until she figured out her next steps. But David noticed she'd bought plants for the windows and hung Sarah's watercolor paintings on the walls. People putting down roots, he'd learned, often did so without realizing it. She'd also started working part-time at the library, helping Mrs. Peterson with the computer system and organizing the children's reading program. Katie attended every session, proudly introducing Emma as my Aunt Emma to anyone who would listen. The trust fund Sarah had saved had given Emma options. She could go back to Chicago, start over somewhere new, or as David quietly hoped, stay in Millbrook and build something permanent. But Emma seemed to be in no hurry to make any major decisions, and David had learned not to push. Their relationship was a careful dance of gradual intimacy. Evening dinners became regular occurrences. Emma never missed one of Katie's school events. She and David had fallen into a comfortable routine of shared domestic responsibilities and quiet conversations that stretched late into the night. But they hadn't talked about the future. They hadn't made any commitments beyond the present moment. And David was okay with that. Mostly, Emma needed time to heal from 20 years of self-protection, and he was learning that love sometimes meant being patient with someone else's process. The call came on a Thursday evening in late April. David was grading Katie's math homework while Emma helped her practice for the school spelling bee when his phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but something made him answer. David Matthews. Yes, this is Detective Rodriguez with the Chicago Police Department. I'm calling about Emma Hayes. Is she available? David felt his stomach drop. Is everything okay? We'd prefer to speak with Miss Hayes directly, if possible. Emma looked up at the tone in David's voice, immediately alert. He held out the phone to her with a questioning look. This is Emma Hayes, she said cautiously. David could only hear one side of the conversation, but Emma's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, shock, and finally something that looked like relief mixed with sadness. Yes, she said finally. Yes, I understand. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I'll be there. She hung up and sat staring at the phone for a long moment. Emma, David prompted gently. They found my father, she said quietly. My biological father, Michael Hayes. He's been looking for me for 30 years. Katie looked up from her spelling words. You have a daddy too. Emma nodded, her voice thick with emotion. Apparently I do. He's been searching for me since I was 8 years old. He never knew my mother put me in foster care. He thought she'd moved away with me and just didn't want him to find us. David felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. Another family connection, another pull away from the life they'd been building. Are you going to see him? He lives in Chicago. The detective gave me his number. Emma looked at David with uncertainty. I don't know what to do. What if he's disappointed? What if I'm not what he's been hoping for all these years? What if he's wonderful and you get to have a father? Katie piped up with 8-year-old optimism. Emma smiled at her. What if indeed? That night, after Katie was in bed, David and Emma sat on his front porch swing, listening to the spring peepers in the creek behind the house. Emma had called her father a conversation that had lasted 2 hours and left her emotionally drained, but cautiously hopeful. He wants to meet, she told David. This weekend, he's driving down from Chicago. How do you feel about that? Terrified, hopeful, guilty. Guilty. Emma leaned back against the swing cushions. Sarah will never get to meet him. She spent her whole life thinking she was alone in the world, and it turns out our father was looking for both of us. If I'd been easier to find, if I'd put myself out there more, maybe he would have found me in time for Sarah to know she had a father who loved her. David took her hand. You can't think like that. You were a kid in the system, trying to survive. You did what you had to do. I know. Logically, I know that. But emotionally, she shrugged. I keep thinking about all the what-ifs. Want some advice? Always. Focus on the what is instead of the what if. You have a father who's been looking for you for 30 years. You have a niece who adores you. You have a man who loves you sitting right here on this swing. Emma turned to look at him. You love me. David realized what he'd said. They'd been dancing around the word for weeks, acknowledging the feeling without naming it directly. But there it was, out in the open. Yes, he said simply. I love you, completely, permanently, without reservation. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. I love you too. Both of you. This whole strange, wonderful, complicated life we're building. Does that mean you're staying permanently? It means I'm staying for now, and I'm going to try very hard not to run away when things get complicated. David kissed her temple. Things are already complicated. We're doing fine. Are we really, we're messy and unconventional and probably doing half of this wrong, but we're doing it together. That's what matters. Emma snuggled closer to him on the swing. I hope my father likes you. I hope so too. But even if he doesn't, it won't change anything. This is our family now. Emma, whatever happens, we'll face it together. And as the spring evening settled around them, David felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, complete certainty about the future. Whatever challenges lay ahead meeting Emma's father, navigating their relationship, raising Katie in their unconventional family, they would handle it together. For the first time in 5 years, David Matthews wasn't just surviving, he was building something new. Michael Hayes arrived in Millbrook on a Saturday morning that dawned clear and bright, as if the weather itself wanted to cooperate with the momentous occasion. David watched from the kitchen window as a blue Honda Accord pulled into his driveway, and a man in his 60s climbed out slowly, looking around the neighborhood with the careful attention of someone memorizing every detail. Emma had been pacing the living room for an hour, alternating between excitement and panic. She'd changed clothes 3 times and was currently wearing a simple blue dress that Katie had declared perfect for meeting grandfathers. He's here, David announced quietly. Emma froze mid-pace. I can't do this. What am I supposed to say to him? Hi, I'm the daughter you've been looking for 30 years. Sorry I was so hard to find. Katie bounced up from the couch where she'd been pretending to read. Can I meet him too? I've never had a grandfather before. Slow down, sweetheart, David said gently. Let's give Aunt Emma and her father some time to talk first. Okay. A soft knock on the front door made Emma's breathing quicken. David squeezed her shoulder reassuringly, then went to answer it. The man standing on his front porch was tall and lean, with silver hair and green eyes that were unmistakably familiar. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt, and his hands shook slightly as he clutched a small wrapped package. Mr. Matthews, I'm Michael Hayes. Thank you for facilitating this. David, please, come in. Michael stepped into the living room and stopped dead when he saw Emma. The package fell from his hands as he stared at her with wonder and disbelief. Emma, his voice cracked on her name. Hi, Dad. The word came out as barely a whisper. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Michael crossed the room in 3 quick strides and enveloped Emma in a hug that 30 years of separation had made desperate and fierce. David quietly ushered Katie into the kitchen, giving father and daughter privacy for their reunion. Through the doorway, he could hear the sound of quiet crying and murmured words too soft to make out. 20 minutes later, they emerged from the living room with tear-stained faces and tentative smiles. Michael's arm was around Emma's shoulders, as if he was afraid she might disappear again. David, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion, I'd like you to meet my father. Michael Hayes, Dad. This is David, and this little lady hiding behind him is Katie, my niece. Michael extended his hand to David with genuine warmth. I can't thank you enough for taking care of Emma. The detective told me about the accident, about how you helped her when she had nowhere else to go. Emma's family, David replied simply. We take care of family. Michael's smile widened. Yes, we do. He knelt down to Katie's eye level. And you must be Sarah's daughter. Emma's told me so much about you already. Katie came out from behind David slowly. Are you really Emma's daddy? I am, which I guess makes me your grandfather. If that's okay with you? Katie considered this seriously. I never had a grandfather before. Do you know how to push swings? Michael laughed. I'm a little out of practice, but I think I can manage. Over the next few hours, the story of Michael Hayes unfolded in bits and pieces. He'd been 22 when he fell in love with Rebecca Sterling, a 19-year-old college dropout from a wealthy family who considered him far beneath their social status. When Rebecca became pregnant with Sarah, her family had forced the relationship to end, threatening to cut her off financially if she maintained contact with Michael. I tried to find her after Sarah was born, Michael explained during lunch. But the Sterlings had money and lawyers. They made it clear that any attempt to contact Rebecca or the baby would result in legal action. But you kept trying, Emma said. Michael nodded. Every few years, I'd hire a private investigator, see if I could find any trace of Rebecca or Sarah. I never found anything until about 10 years ago, when I learned that Rebecca had given birth to a second daughter in 1981. That's when I started looking for both of you. Did you know about Robert? David asked. Michael's expression darkened. I knew Rebecca had a son from her first marriage. I didn't know he was actively keeping his sisters apart. He looked at Emma with regret. If I'd known you were in foster care, Emma, I would have moved heaven and earth to get you out. You should never have been alone. I wasn't completely alone, Emma said, glancing at David and Katie. I found my way to family eventually. They talked until early evening, filling in decades of lost time. Michael had spent his career as a high school history teacher. Never married, never had other children. He'd channeled his parental instincts into his students and his search for his daughters. I have something for you, he said as the day was winding down, retrieving the package he'd dropped earlier. I've been carrying this for 30 years, hoping I'd get the chance to give it to you. Inside was a small silver locket, tarnished with age. Emma opened it to find a tiny photograph of herself as a toddler on one side, and a picture of Sarah as a baby on the other. Rebecca gave me these pictures before her family forced us apart, Michael explained. I always hoped that someday I'd be able to give them to both my daughters. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She knew about me. Sarah knew she had a sister. Michael shook his head. Rebecca was pregnant with you when we broke up, but she didn't tell me. I didn't know you existed until I hired that investigator 10 years ago. And by then, Sarah was already gone, Emma finished. I'm sorry, Michael said quietly. I'm sorry I wasn't there for either of you when you needed me. I'm sorry it took 30 years to find you. I'm sorry Sarah never got to know she had a father who loved her. Emma stood up and hugged him again. You're here now. That's what matters. As the evening wound down, Michael prepared to drive back to Chicago, but not before making plans to return the following weekend. He wanted to see Emma's apartment, meet her friends, learn about the life she'd built for herself. I'd like to take you and Katie to Chicago soon, he told David. Show you where I live, introduce you to some old friends. Emma's family is my family now. After Michael left, David and Emma sat on the front porch while Katie played in the yard, catching fireflies in mason jars. How are you feeling? David asked. Full, Emma said after a moment. Like I've been carrying around this empty space my whole life, and suddenly it's filled to overflowing. She paused. Scared, too. Of what? Of losing it. Of waking up tomorrow and finding out it was all a dream. Of somehow messing this up the way I've messed up every other relationship in my life. David took her hand. You're not going to mess this up, and you're not going to lose us. We're not going anywhere. Promise, promise. Emma leaned against his shoulder, watching Katie chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. I called the library today. Mrs. Peterson offered me the full-time children's librarian position. Benefits, retirement plan, the works. David's heart jumped. Are you going to take it? I'm thinking about it. It would mean staying in Millbrook permanently, putting down real roots. How do you feel about that? Emma was quiet for a long moment. For the first time in my life, it feels like home. David kissed the top of her head. Then I think you have your answer. 2 years later, the wedding was small, held in the backyard of the house on Maple Street under the oak tree, where Sarah had once hung a tire swing for Katie. Emma wore Sarah's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, with the silver locket Michael had given her as her something old. Katie served as maid of honor, carrying a bouquet of white roses and yellow daisies, Sarah's favorite flowers. Michael walked Emma down the aisle, beaming with pride as he placed her hand in David's. Robert Sterling sat in the front row, his relationship with Emma slowly healing through family therapy and his genuine efforts to make amends for the past. The ceremony was officiated by Pastor Williams from St. Warnish Mary's, the same minister who had buried Sarah 5 years earlier. He spoke about love's ability to heal old wounds, about family being both the people we're born to and the people who choose to stay. David and Emma, he said, you've both learned that love doesn't replace what we've lost, it builds on the foundation of what we've been given. Today, you're not just promising to love each other, you're promising to honor the memory of Sarah, to raise Katie with knowledge of her mother's love, and to build a family that celebrates both the past and the future. The reception was held in the backyard, with tables set up under string lights and paper lanterns. The whole town seemed to be there. Mrs. Peterson from the library, Tom Bradley from the hardware store, Dr. Chen from the hospital, even some of Katie's classmates and their families. During the father-daughter dance, Emma and Michael swayed to The Way You Look Tonight, the same song he and Rebecca had danced to at their high school prom. Watching them, David felt Sarah's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. Approving, blessing, grateful. Later that evening, as the guests departed and the cleanup began, Katie approached Emma with something hidden behind her back. "I have a wedding present for you," she announced solemnly. She handed Emma a handmade book, carefully illustrated with colored pencils and bound with yarn. The title, written in Katie's careful 10-year-old handwriting, read, "The Story of Our Family." Emma opened it slowly, David reading over her shoulder. The first page showed a stick figure, family a man, a woman, and a little girl under a house with smoke coming from the chimney. "Once upon a time," Katie had written, "there was a daddy and a little girl who were very sad because the mommy went to heaven." The story continued through Emma's arrival, her father finding her, the wedding, and concluded with a picture of a larger family gathered around a dinner table. "And they all lived happily ever after," Katie had written, "because love finds a way." Emma knelt down and hugged Katie tightly. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me." "It's our story," Katie said proudly. "Mommy always said every family has a story. Now we have one too." That night, after Katie was asleep and the house was quiet, David and Emma sat on their porch swing, now officially their swing, their porch, their home. Emma wore one of David's old t-shirts over her pajamas, her hair loose around her shoulders, the locket glinting in the moonlight. "Any regrets?" David asked. "About what?" "Taking a chance on a complicated ready-made family, staying in a small town where everyone knows your business, marrying a mechanic instead of finding some successful city guy." Emma laughed. "You mean, do I regret finding everything I never knew I was looking for? Do I regret having a father who loves me, a husband who sees me, a daughter who chose me as her aunt? Do I regret living in a place where people care enough to be nosy?" "When you put it like that, David." Emma turned to face him fully. 3 years ago, I was driving through a snowstorm, trying to decide whether to visit my sister's grave. I was alone, bitter, convinced that love was something that happened to other people. Now I'm married to you. Katie calls me mom half the time. My father drives down every other weekend to have dinner with us. And I'm 3 months pregnant with our baby. David smiled. They'd found out about the pregnancy just 2 weeks earlier, a development that had Katie over the moon with excitement about becoming a big sister. "When you put it like that," he said, echoing her earlier words, "I don't have regrets. David, I have gratitude. Every single day, I'm grateful that I crashed into your life." "Literally crashed. The best kind of meeting." David pulled her closer on the swing. "I love you, Emma Hayes Matthews." "I love you too, David Matthews. Both of you," she added, placing a hand on her still flat stomach. They swung gently in the warm summer evening, listening to the creek babble behind the house and the soft sound of Katie's breathing through her open bedroom window. Above them, the stars shone bright and clear, the same stars Sarah had once wished on, the same stars that had watched over Emma during her lonely years, the same stars that now looked down on a family built from love, loss, and the kind of hope that refuses to give up. In the distance, a church bell chimed midnight, marking the beginning of another day in their beautifully complicated, perfectly imperfect life together. And Emma Matthews' sister, daughter, wife, mother, survivor finally understood what home meant. In the end, the Matthews family learned that some storms don't come to destroy, they come to reveal what was always meant to be. David found love again, not as a replacement for what he'd lost, but as proof that the heart has room for both memory and hope. Emma discovered that family isn't just about blood or shared history, it's about the people who choose to stay when staying gets complicated. And Katie learned the most important lesson of all, that love doesn't divide when it's shared. It multiplies. The truth had cost them everything they thought they knew about their past, but it gave them something more valuable, a future built on honesty instead of secrets, on choice instead of circumstance. Michael Hayes got to walk his daughter down the aisle 30 years after he thought he'd lost her forever. Robert Sterling learned that some mistakes can be forgiven if you're willing to spend the rest of your life making amends. And Sarah's memory wasn't diminished by the new love that grew in her garden, it was honored by it. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that shouldn't exist on paper, but somehow find a way to make perfect sense in the heart. What would you do if a stranger crashed into your life and turned out to hold the key to everything you thought you'd lost?